For years I thought I knew who I was: a wife, a mother, a woman. Bound by duty and sacrifice, I married too young to a man who gave me away out of one prison only to lock me inside. Another. Our life together was never warm, never filled with love. Just obligation, and over time resentment became the only thing keeping us connected. I wanted to leave. I tried to leave, but when someone controls everything, your home, your money, your freedom, leaving becomes impossible. So I stayed even as the years turned me into a shadow of the person I used to be, and then something happened, something that should have never happened. It was late. I was half asleep, the air in the room was still, then I felt movement beside me, slow, rhythmic. At first I thought I was imagining it, but when I opened my eyes, I saw him, and the moment I saw him, something in me shifted, something I never thought possible. Before we begin, I need to warn you, this story contains mature themes. It deals with the kind of struggles most people don't talk about, kind that make you question everything you thought you knew about love, loyalty, and morality. If these topics make you uncomfortable, you might want to stop watching now, but if you stay, I promise this story will stay with you long after it ends. To understand what happened that night, you have to understand me first, my life, my choices, the people I let shape me into who I became. I was 19 when I married Richard Wiggins, too young to know what love was, too desperate to care. My childhood was nothing to long for. I grew up in a house where silence was safer than speaking, where love meant obligation and survival meant obedience. My parents weren't cruel, not in the obvious way, but they were cold, strict, demanding. My father believed a woman's worth was tied to the man she married. My mother believed a woman should endure. That's what she did, and that's what she expected me to do. So I learned young that happiness wasn't a right, it was a privilege reserved for other people. Richard came into my life like a solution to a problem. He was older, success, respect my parents approved, and after years of feeling trapped, I saw him as a way out. I didn't love him, but love wasn't the goal. Stability was. Escape was. At first I convinced myself I'd made the right choice. He provided. He was never kind, but he wasn't cruel either, not in the beginning. I thought maybe in team we'd grow into something real. That never happened. Over the years, Richard became something else, colder, meaner, not with fists but with words, with control, with money. He made sure I knew fate, everything I had belonged to him. The house, the clothes on my back, even theft I ate, it was his, and I only had it because he allowed me to. I told myself this was normal, that this was just marriage, that I had made my bed and had to lie and eaten. I did 4 years, then I had my children, and for the first time I had something of my own, something Richard couldn't take from me. My daughter, Diane, was my first. She was strong from the start, fierce, independent. She saw things for what they were. Even as a child, she understood that Richard wasn't the kind of father who gave love easily. By the time she was old enough, she wanted nothing to do with him. She left home at the first chance she got and never looked back. I understood Dalton was different. He was always by my side. He saw the things I thought I had. Well, the nights I sat in silence after Richard belittled me, the days I swallowed my pride just to keep the peace. He noticed, he cared, and unlike his sister, didn't turn away. He tried to shield me from Richard's control in the small ways he could. He'd talk back when I couldn't. He'd take my side in arguments that weren't his to fight. He hated him not just for what he did to me, but for what he was: a man who saw love as weakness, a man who treated his family like possessions. As Dalton got older, his anger towards Richard only grew, and in turn Richard resented him for it. The tension in our home became unbearable, the fights louder, the silence longer, and then one day I stopped pretending. I told Richard the first wasn't sleeping in our bed anymore. I didn't care what excuse I had to give. I just couldn't do it anymore. I moved my things into the spare room, but Richard didn't take it well. He wasn't the kind of man who handled rejection with grace. He made sure I felt it in the way he looked at me, in the way I controlled the money, even more in the way he reminded me over and over again that without him I was nothing. Dalton saw all of it, and one night he came to me with an offer. He told me to sleep in his room instead, that I didn't have to be alone, that he didn't want me to be. I should have said no. I should have seen what was coming, but I didn't at first. It was just about comfort, nothing less. Dalton wanted to protect me. That's what he said when he offered me his room. And after years of feeling unprotected, feeling invisible in my own home, I let him. It was supposed to be temporary, a place where I could breathe, where I could sleep without waiting for Richard's next cruel remark. And for a while, that's exactly what it was. The first few nights felt strange, not because of him, but because of what it meant. I was sharing a space with someone who actually wanted me there, someone who wasn't waiting for me to fail, to beg, to shrink. I had gotten so used to walking on eggshells that I didn't know what to do with the silence, a silence that wasn't heavy but light. Safe, we talked more than we had in years, late into the night, long after we should have been asleep, about his childhood, about mine, about Aiden and how she got out, about Richard, and how never did he told me he wanted better for me that. I deserved better. I wanted to believe him. Some nights we'd laugh, not the quiet, polite laugh I'd mastered over the years, real laughter, the kind that makes your stomach hurt. I had forgotten what that felt like. Other nights we sat in silence, and somehow that was even better. The familiarity of it all should have been comforting. It should have been safe, but then something shifted. It was small at first, so small I barely noticed the way Dal looked at me changed, not all the time, just for a second. A flicker in his expression that felt different. It wasn't something I could name, not yet, but I felt it. I ignored it, pushed it away, told myself I was imagining things, that I was reading too much into nothing. But Anseo noticed something you can't unsee. It was in the way his eyes lingered a little too long. When I walked past way, his body tensed. When I hugged him goodnight, the way his hand rested on my back a second longer than it told of. It wasn't just him, it was me too. I didn't want to admit it, but I felt it, the shift, the weight of something unspoken pressing down on both of us. I should have moved back to the spare room. I should have created distance, but I didn't. Instead, said I let lines blur. One night I woke up to find him still awake, sitting at the edge of the bed, staring at the floor. His hands were clasped together, his jaw tight. I asked if he was okay. He didn't answer at first, just exhaled slowly, like was trying to keep something inside. Then he said, I just hate him. I hate how he treats you. I told him not to worry, that I had lived with Richard's wife for years, that it didn't hurt me anymore. Dalton turned to look at me then, and for the first time I saw it clearly. The thing I had been pretending wasn't their thing. Neither of us were ready to name. It wasn't pity, it wasn't concern, it was something else. I should have looked away, but I didn't. Dalton's birthday was coming up, 20 years old, a milestone he didn't want to celebrate, but I insisted. I wanted one night, just one night, where we could forget about everything else. So I took him to dinner, just the two of us. I didn't realize it then, but something about it felt different from the start. I wore my nicest dress. I put on makeup for the first time in weeks. I wanted to look presentable. That's what I told myself. Weird or wine. I don't usually drink much, but that night I let myself. The restaurant was warm, dimly lit, intimate in a way I wasn't expecting. We talked about everything, and for the first time in years, I wasn't a mother, I wasn't a wife, I was just a woman. And he saw me. We laughed, we leaned in too close. Our voices dropped lower, more private. At one point he reached across the table, his fingers brushing mine. I should have pulled away. I didn't. By the time we got home, my head was light, my body relaxed in a way I hadn't felt in years. I'd barely made it to bed before I collapsed onto the mattress. I didn't even get under the covers. I just lay there, my body sinking into the sheets, my mind drifting between exhaustion and something else. Something warm, something dangerous. I don't remember falling asleep, but I remember waking up. The room was dark, the air was still, but something was different. I felt it before I saw it, and when I opened my eyes, I saw him. The room was dark, the kind of darkness that makes everything feel heavier. Still quiet, but something woke me, a shift in the air, a presence, a movement that wasn't mine at first. I thought I was dreaming, that I was still caught in the haze of wine and exhaustion, but then I felt it again, settled, deliberate, close. I opened my eyes just a little, just enough to see, and there he was, Dalton. He was lying beside me. His back slightly arched, his breath uneven. The blanket had slipped down, revealing his bare chest. His hand was under the covers, moving in a slow, steady rhythm. It froze. My mind couldn't catch up with what I was seeing, couldn't process it. I should have turned away. I should have made a noise, shifted anything, but I didn't. I stayed still, watching. I told myself it wasn't what it looked like, that maybe he was just restless, adjusting in his sleep. But the longer I watched, the harder it was to lie to myself. His breathing grew heavier, his fingers curled into the sheets. And when the blanket shifted just enough, I saw more than I should have. I don't know how long I laid there pretending to be asleep. Seconds, minutes, time lost, meaningless. I knew was that I couldn't move. My body wouldn't let me, my mind wouldn't let me, and then it was over. Dalton exhaled, sharp and quiet. He sat up, ran a hand through his hair, and slipped out of bed. I listened as he walked to the bathroom, the soft creak of the door, the hush of running water. My heart pounded so hard. I thought he'd hear it, but he didn't. He had no idea I was awake. I should have felt disgusted. I should have felt angry, shame, anything, but I didn't. I felt something worse, curiosity. When he came back to bed, I expected everything to feel different, to feel wrong, but he just pulled the blanket over himself, turned on his side, and let out a slow breath like nothing had happened, like it was just another night. But it wasn't. I didn't sleep. Mimint wouldn't let me. Every time I closed my eyes, the image burned behind my eyelids. His body, his movements, the way his face looked in that dim light, the way I hadn't looked away, and worst of all, the way it made me feel. It wasn't attraction, it wasn't desire. It was something deeper, more complicated, a realization I didn't want to face. Dalton wasn't a child anymore. He wasn't the little boy who held my hand in the grocery store who needed me to tie his shoes or tuck him in at night. He was a man who carried himself differently now, a man who had spent years resenting his father, standing up for me, protecting me, a man who had just done something so private, so human, right beside me. I knew it wasn't intentional. He hadn't meant for me to see. He hadn't done it to provoke anything, but that didn't change the fact that I had seen, and now I couldn't unsee. I turned on my side, facing away from him. I told myself to stop thinking, to forget to sleep, but my body refused to relax every time. He shifted even slightly. I tensed. My skin was hyper-aware of the space between us, of the heat from his body, just inches away. I hated myself for noticing more and couldn't come fast enough. When I finally got out of bed, the sun was already creeping through the curtains. I moved slowly, carefully, like any sudden motion would shatter the fragile air between you. Could feel Dalton watching me, but I didn't turn to look at him. I told myself to act normal, that if I treated it like a no thing, it would be nothing. So I went through the motions. I brushed my hair, changed my clothes. I left the room without a word. In the kitchen, and not a coffee, with shaky hands. The house was too quiet. I kept waiting to hear Richard's footsteps, his usual grumble about how late I was to make breakfast, but he wasn't home. He had left early for work. Just like every Saturday, it was just me and Dalton. I didn't hear him come in, but I felt him before I saw him, his presence heavy and cautious. He stopped a few feet behind me, lingering. "Mom, you okay?" I forced a smile before turning to face him. "Yeah, just tired." It was a lie, and he knew it. His expression was careful, measured. I wondered if he felt it too, the tension that hadn't been there before, the thing neither of us wanted to name. He poured himself coffee, and for a few minutes we just stood there, side by side, pretending nothing had changed. But it had, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't forget. I told myself I could forget that if I ignored it long enough. If I buried it deep enough, it would disappear, but the mind doesn't work like that. Once a thought takes root, it spreads, it lingers, it waits. Dalton and I didn't talk about that night. We pretended it never happened, but something was different. The space between us felt charged, heavy with something unspoken, and every time I looked at him, I felt it again, that shift, that slow unraveling of whatever boundaries hadn't existed. I wanted to believe I was imagining it, that I was reading too much into the way he looked at me, the way his body tensed when I walked past, the hesitation in his voice when he spoke my name. But deep down, I knew better. It wasn't in my head, it was real, and it terrified me. It happened 3 nights later, another restless night, another silence too thick to ignore. Dalton waddling on his side, his breathing slow and steady, but I could tell he was awake. So was I. Neither of us spoke, neither of us moved. Then he shifted just slightly, his back against mine, a touch so light it could have been accidental, but it wasn't. I should have moved away. I should have drawn the line right then and there, but I didn't. I stayed still, my body stiff, my breath caught in my throat. He didn't push further, he didn't speak, he just stayed there, barely touching me, with waiting for something I couldn't name, and I let it happen. The guilt hit me all at once, a wave of nausea, a rush of shame so strong it made my skin burn. I sat up quickly, peeling the blanket tighter around me. Dalton sat up too. "Mom," his voice was lone, certain. He knew something was wrong, he could feel it. Just like I could. I couldn't look at him, couldn't face what I might see in his expression. So I got out of bed and left the room without saying a word. That was the first time I truly admitted to myself that something had changed, that I had changed, and that I was the one letting it happen. The next morning, I couldn't avoid him. He was waiting for me in the kitchen, his hands wrapped around a mug of coffee, his eyes dark with something I didn't want to name. "Need to talk?" he said. I shook my head. "No, we don't, Mom." His voice was firmer this time. Not demanding, but steady, like he wasn't going to let me run from this. I sighed, pressing my fingers against my temples. I didn't have the energy for this, but I also knew I couldn't keep pretending. So I sat down across from him, staring at the table. Instead of his face that night, he started. He didn't need to say which one. We both knew. "I know you were awake." A cold shock ran through my fingers, curled against the wooden surface, nails digging into it. I forced myself to stay calm. "I don't know what you're talking about," I lied. Dalton exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "Please just be honest with me." I swallowed hard. My throat felt dry, like I'd swallowed dust. I couldn't do this. I couldn't have this conversation, not with him. It was a mistake. I said quickly, "A moment that shouldn't have happened, and it won't happen again." I finally forced myself to look at him, and what I saw in his face nearly broke me. He wasn't angry. He was ashamed. He looked lost, confused, like he was waiting for me to say something that would make sense of everything, but I had nothing to give him. "I didn't mean for you to see." He said quietly. He broke off, running a hand over his face. I don't know what's wrong with me. My heart ate, but I couldn't let myself feel it. I had to shut it down fast before this turned into something worse. Nothing's wrong with you, I said, my voice sharper than I intended. We're just in a bad situation, that's all. I shouldn't be in your room, it's messing with our heads, and it stops now. Dalton flinched like I'd struck him. You are leaving, I have to. Silence stretched between us, long and bearable. Okay, he said finally, but his voice was hollow, empty. I wanted to reach across the table to comfort him, to take away the hurt in his eyes, but I couldn't. He had already crossed one line, I couldn't risk another, so I stood up, walked away, and tried to convince myself it was the right thing to do. Leaving's hold I felt like relief, like a weight lifting off my chest. Instead, it felt like grief. I moved back into the spare room that night. I told myself it was over, that I was setting things right, but the silence between Dalton and me stretched so thick it felt suffocating. He didn't try to talk to me, he barely looked at me, and that should have made things easier. It didn't. I thought about leaving the house entirely, about packing a bag, finding a way out, but Richard had made sure I couldn't. He controlled everything, the money, the accounts, even the car was in his name. I had nowhere to go, and I had no way to get there, so I stayed trapped in a house where every room felt like a different kind of prison. The worst part, it wasn't Richard first was avoiding it was Dalton. He stopped eating dinner at the table, stopped waiting for me in the mornings, stopped lingering in the kitchen like he used to. If I walked into a room, he walked out. I told myself this was good, that distance would fix the very thing, that we could go back to normal if we just pretended hard enough. But the distance only made things worse. It made the air between us feel unbearable, made every glance feel like a landmine, every accidental brush of our hands a mistake waiting to happen. I caught myself listening for his footsteps at night, waiting for his bedroom door to open, hoping and hating myself for hoping that he'd come to me, that he'd ask me to stay, that he'd tell me it wasn't just in my head. But he didn't, and I knew I couldn't be. The Oneto break first. It happened a week later. I was in the laundry room folding clothes, trying to focus on something, anything other than the gnawing feeling in my chest. The house was quiet. Richard wasn't home yet, and Dalton was upstairs keeping to himself like he had been all week. Then I heard his footsteps behind me. I didn't turn around right away. I just kept folding, pretending, ignoring the way my hands shook. Mom, he said. His voice was raw, tired. He sounded just as broken as I felt. I swallowed hard. Yeah, he didn't answer right away, and when I finally turned to look at him, the expression on his face made my stomach drop. I can't do this, he said. I can't act like nothing happened. My throat tightened. Dalton, Nick, no, it's wrong. He cut in. I know, but I don't know how to stop feeling this way. My heart pounded so loud I could barely hear my own thoughts. This was the conversation I'd been running from Theon. I knew we couldn't have the one that, if spoken aloud, would make everything real. I shook my head. We have to stop this. We have to forget. Dalton exhaled sharply, his hands clenched into fists. How am I supposed to forget, though? Are you? I had no answer. Because the truth was I hadn't forgotten. I couldn't cook a step closer, and I forced myself not to move back, not to let the space between us shrink, not to let the weight of everything pull me under. Say, he said, tell me you don't feel it too. My hands trembled as I gripped the laundry basket, forcing myself to stay upright, to stay strong, to not let my own weakness destroy us both. I wanted to lie, to end it with one simple sentence, but words wouldn't come. Dalton let out a bitter laugh. Yeah, that's what I thought. Had turned away, shaking his head. And just like that, it was over. Whatever unspent thing had been pulling us together, it shattered in an instant, and I let it. After that, things changed again, but not in the way I expected. Dalton didn't avoid me anymore. He didn't pull away, but he wasn't the same either. He was distant in a different way. Like a wall had gone up between us, one that neither of us had the strength to break down. I told myself this was what needed to happen, that it was better this way, that whatever had taken root between us had been ripped out before it could grow into something we couldn't undo. But at night, lying alone in that spare room, I couldn't stop wondering if I had made the right choice, or if I had just lost the only thing in my life that had ever truly felt like mine. There are things in life you can undo, mistakes that can be erased, choices that can be written, but then there are the ones that stay with you, the ones that settle deep in your bones, refusing to let go. This was one off toast. Dalton and I never spoke about it again, not in words, but the weight of it remained. It lingered in the way we moved around each other, and the spaces between us that once felt safe but now felt dangerous, in a silence that stretched too long, too tight, too filled with everything we could never say. Richard never noticed, or if he did care. He was too busy controlling everything else, too busy keeping me tethered to a life I no longer recognized as my own. Diane visited Lacey, thinks she sensed something was wrong, but I couldn't tell her how. Could I? How do you put something like this into words? How do you explain a feeling that shouldn't exist, a moment that should have never happened? I spent months convincing myself that I had done the right thing, that stepping away had saved us both, that whatever was between Dalton and me had been nothing more than a side effect of loneliness off desperation of two broken people reaching for something they shouldn't have. But even now, I don't know if I believe that I never left Richard. I wanted to God. I wanted to, but he had spent years making sure I never could, and I was too tired to fight anymore. Dalton did leave eventually. He packed his bags one night and told me he was going. He didn't ask for my permission. He didn't need it. Had just looked at me waiting for something, maybe for me to ask him to stay, maybe for me to give him a reason to go, but I had nothing left to give. Where will you go? I asked. Anywhere. But here, he said. I nodded, and just like that, he was gone. I sat in his empty room that night, staring at the walls, at the bed, at the space where he had once been. The air still smelled like him. And for the first time in a long time, I let myself cry, not for what had happened, not for what could have, but for the fact that the only person who had ever made me feel seen was now just another ghost in a house filled with them. I tell myself that life goes on, that time heals, that people forget, but some things don't fade, some wounds never close, and sometimes the worst betrayals aren't the ones that come from others, they're the ones we commit against ourselves. I don't know what Dalton thinks of me now, if he remembers that night the way I do, if he hates me for it, or if he understands that I did what I had to do, what I thought was right, but you don't know this. I lost him that night, maybe not in the way you lose someone to other distance or time, but in the way you lose a version of yourself. You can diverge it back, and that more than anything is the hardest thing to live with. At what point does a line become too blurred to see? His betrayal always black and white, or does it sometimes live in the spaces in between, the ones we never meant to cross? I want to know what you think. Leave a comment below, share your thoughts, your experiences, your truth. Let's talk about the things most people are too afraid to say out loud. And if this story stayed with you, if you want more stories that make you feel, think, and question, then like this video and subscribe. There's always another story waiting to be told, and you won't want to miss it.